The wagon was already burning when Sable reached the crossroads. She had smelled the children first, 5 small bodies pressed against the iron bars of a trader's cage, their breath coming in shallow, desperate clouds against the winter air. The scent of fear was something she had learned to recognize early in her life, back when fear had been the only perfume she wore. But this was different. This was the particular cold terror of the very young, the ones who did not yet understand why the world had become so cruel, only that it had. She had followed that scent for half a mile through the dark pine forest, her bare feet sinking into the snow with each step, her old wool cloak doing almost nothing against the wind that came down off the mountain in waves. And when she saw the cage, when she saw the 5 wolf pups, none of them older than 3 years, she judged, with their silver-tipped ears and their wide amber eyes, something inside her that had been quiet for a very long time woke up and would not be reasoned with. She was an Omega. That was the first thing anyone said about her. Always, the constraint that preceded her name in every sentence. An Omega, unranked, unclaimed, cast out of Thornveil Pack 2 years ago, with nothing but the cloak on her back and a wound in her chest that had taken considerably longer than 2 years to stop bleeding. Omegas did not fight slavers. Omegas did not do much of anything, according to the wolves who ranked above them, which was every other wolf alive. Omegas endured. That was the doctrine. Sable set the wagon on fire, and she did not feel even a fraction of regret. She had found the trader's lantern first, hanging from the wagon's hitching post, and then she had found the lock mechanism on the cage, a crude thing, iron and old. The kind a man buys cheap because he does not expect his cargo to be worth much resistance. The fire was a distraction. Nothing more. She pulled the lock while the trader ran for his bucket, and she pulled all 5 pups out into the snow, and she wrapped her cloak around them in a mass of small, shaking bodies and copper-smelling fear, and she ran. She did not stop running until the screaming behind her had faded to nothing, until the orange glow of the burning wagon was just a smear on the horizon through the trees. She ran until her lungs ached, and her feet had gone numb in a way that suggested damage she would deal with later. And then she found a hollow in the roots of a great black pine, and she pressed all 5 pups into it and covered them with her body and her cloak, and told them, very quietly, that they were safe now. She did not entirely believe it herself, but they did, and that, at the moment, was the thing that mattered. What she did not know, what she could not have known, crouched in that pine hollow with 5 shivering children pressed against her ribs, her feet going to ice and her heartbeat only beginning to slow, was that the crossroads where the wagon burned sat precisely at the border between 2 territories. Behind her, the burnt ruins of what she had done. Ahead, the land of Ironmere, ruled by the Ash King, a man whose reputation reached even the places she had been trying to disappear into. And the Ash King's scouts were already in the trees. It had not always been like this for her. There had been a time, not so many years ago, that felt now like something she had read in a book, like it had happened to a different woman, with a different name and a different face. A woman who had believed, foolishly, and with her whole heart, that the world intended to be kind to her. Her name was Sable Ashcroft, and she had been born into Thornveil Pack under a full amber moon, which the elder women had said was significant, and which the Alpha's son had said was nothing more than timing. She had grown up on the eastern edge of Pack territory, in a house that smelled of pine resin and her grandmother's cooking, in a family that was small but solid, the kind of family that knows its own worth without needing anyone else to confirm it. Her mother had been a healer. Her father had been a cartographer who made beautiful maps of places he had never visited. Sable had inherited something from both of them, a precise attention to the world as it actually was, and a persistent, perhaps inconvenient belief that there were places beyond the one she occupied. The designation had come on her 16th year, as it came to all young wolves. The assessment ceremony, at the center of the pack's longhouse, the elder council seated in their carved oak chairs, the alpha standing at the head of the room with his son Callum beside him, like a shadow learning to cast itself. Every pack member of age attended. Every pack member of age watched. Sable stood in the center of the stone floor and felt the elder's hands at her temples, the formal touch of rank reading. A process she had been told was painless and brief, and she watched the elder's face because she had always been the kind of person who watched faces. The elder's expression did not shift. That, she would later understand, was not reassurance. That was a practiced control. "Omega," the elder said, and something in the room changed. A sound that was almost a collective exhale, and then a rearrangement of postures, a subtle and devastating withdrawal, as though everyone in that room had taken a single step back from her without moving their feet. She remembered looking at Callum. She had known Callum all her life, had grown up beside him, had learned to run in her wolf form beside him through the summer meadows east of the village, had spent countless evenings at the longhouse fire while their parents talked. She had thought, with the particular optimism of a 16-year-old who had not yet been taught that hope was a liability, that Callum's expression when the elder spoke would be the steady and familiar thing she could hold on to while everything shifted. He looked away from her, not cruelly. That was the thing she had always held on to, the thing that made it worse rather than better. He looked away the way people look away from something painful that they have already decided they cannot fix. He was 18 then, already beta-ranked and bound for the Alpha's inner circle. And she understood in that moment, with a clarity that felt like cold water poured directly into her chest, that the decision had already been made before she stepped onto that stone floor. Not by Callum alone, but by the world that had built him. She did not cry. She had not cried since she was 12, and it was not a habit she intended to resume. She inclined her head to the elder, she stepped off the stone floor, and she went home and sat at the kitchen table while her mother made tea, and they did not speak for a long time. "It doesn't mean what they say it means," her mother said finally. "I know," Sable said. She believed neither of them at the time. The years between 16 and 20 were a kind of education in invisibility. She learned what the Omega designation meant in practice. She was permitted to remain in the pack, to contribute her labor, to attend communal events, to exist in the spaces between the ranked wolves like furniture that had not quite been placed properly. She was not cruel treated. She would say that much for Thornveil. She was simply not seen, which was its own species of suffering, quieter and more persistent than cruelty, because it left no marks that anyone else could point to. She learned, in those years, a great number of things that the ranked wolves did not bother learning. She learned herbalism from the pack's older Omega women who had been quietly accumulating knowledge for decades in the way that people accumulate things when they are told they will not be given them. She learned to read weather by the way the birch leaves turned before a storm. She learned which roots were edible in winter and which would make you sick, which was knowledge that had never seemed important until it suddenly was. She learned to move through the world in a way that took up very little space, not because she was ashamed, but because it was efficient, and efficiency was the only luxury available to her. She learned, also, to pay very close attention to the things that people said to each other when they thought no one ranked low enough to matter was listening. This was how she learned about the river agreement and the eastern border dispute. This was how she learned that the Alpha's maps were wrong and that Thornveil's territory encroached 4 miles into land that technically belonged to the Ironmere coalition. And this was how she learned, on a cold evening in her 20th year, when she was carrying a basket of dried herbs past the back of the council building, what Callum's father had said about her. He had said that an unclaimed omega with her tendencies was a liability. He had used the word tendencies with a specific inflection that meant someone had been paying attention to things she had done and deciding they constituted a threat. She stood outside the council building for 30 seconds and let that information settle into her body the way cold does not all at once, but incrementally, until it is simply the temperature you exist at. Then she went home and began making a list. The formal exile came 6 weeks later, at a pack assembly in the Longhouse, announced in the careful language that packs used when they wanted the surface of a thing to appear clean. She was told she was being released from pack obligation, a phrase that sounded like a gift but was structured like a locked door. The reasons given were administrative. The reasons not given were the ones she had already catalogued. She was 20 years old, and she stood in the center of that longhouse, in the same spot where she had stood at 16, and she looked at Callum, and Callum looked at her this time fully, directly, and she saw on his face something that she had not expected. He looked as though he were trying to apologize for an earthquake. She did not wait to hear whether the apology would actually be spoken. She picked up the bag she had packed 3 days before, because she had known this was coming, and she walked out of Thornveil, and she did not look back at the village, not because it did not hurt, but because looking back would not have helped anything. The 2 years that followed were the making of her, though she would not have described them that way at the time. At the time, they were simply the conditions of her life, alone, unaffiliated, moving through the borderland territories between the great pack holdings, taking work where she could find it, and sleeping rough when she couldn't. She hired herself as an herbalist's assistant in the town of Gravain for 3 months. She worked as a guide through the mountain passes in the Thornback Range for a season because she had memorized her father's maps and could navigate by starlight in conditions that made other travelers stop. She traded herbal remedies for lodging. She ate when there was food and didn't when there wasn't, and she discovered, somewhat to her own surprise, that she was considerably more durable than the Omega designation had suggested. It was in the Thornback passes that she first heard about the Ash King in any real detail. The guides she worked with were free-ranging wolves, the kind who owed allegiance to no single pack, and they spoke about the various territorial leaders with the dispassionate frankness of people who have nothing invested in making those leaders sound good. The Ash King Riker Ashvane, Alpha of Ironmere, ruler of the largest independent coalition in the northern reaches, was described in terms that were uniformly complicated. Hard, they said. Not cruel, but unsparing. He had built Ironmere into what it was over 8 years of sustained, strategic effort, absorbing smaller packs and border settlements through agreements that were fair but non-negotiable. He had a reputation for keeping his word to the letter, which meant he was also a man you needed to read carefully before you agreed to anything. He had not taken a mate. This was noted with significance in every telling, because an alpha without a mate bond was an alpha whose coalition had no formal center of gravity, no stabilizing second, and this was considered either a vulnerability or a choice depending on who was doing the assessment. She had filed all of this information in the same careful way she filed everything, not because she expected it to become relevant to her life, but because she had learned that the information you do not expect to need is often the information you cannot do without. She was thinking about none of this when she pulled 5 frozen pups out of an iron cage and ran. She was thinking about getting them warm. The hollow in the pine roots held through the darkest part of the night. She kept the pups pressed close, sharing body heat, and she learned their names in the process, the names they could give her, which were 3 whole names and 2 partial ones, the small ones having not yet solidified the concept of themselves into something transmittable. The oldest, a boy of perhaps 3 with a bruise across his left cheekbone that made her jaw tighten, said his name was Fen. The girl beside him said Mira. The 3 younger ones were arranged in a hierarchy of language development that produced, in order, Tal, something that sounded like Bree, and a determined silence that she decided to honor by simply calling him Small for the moment. Fen told her, in the careful way of a child who has learned to ration his trust, that they had been taken from the Greywood settlement, that the trader had come at night, that their parents had, and here Fen stopped, and rearranged his face into something older than it should have been, and said simply, "They tried to stop him." Sable sat with that for a moment. "Okay," she said. "You don't have to say more than that." He looked at her with his bruised face and his 2 old eyes. "Are you a fighter?" She thought about the burning wagon. "Not usually," she said. "Tonight I made an exception." She had not quite finished that sentence when she heard the footfall in the snow. Not one set, several, and moving with the deliberate, measured pace of trained wolves who were not trying to hide the fact of their approach, which meant either arrogance or a specific kind of intentional reassurance. She shifted around the pups, putting herself between the opening of the hollow and whatever was coming, and she held very still. "We mean no harm." The voice came from outside the hollow, deep and even, carrying the kind of calm that was not the absence of force, but the choice not to deploy it. The children's smell of fear. "We would prefer not to add to that." Sable said nothing. She was assessing. "The wagon burning is on our territory border. The traitor, what was left of the traitor's situation, has been addressed." A pause. "The crossroads is contested ground, but you are 400 feet into Ironmere jurisdiction. I am obligated to inform you of that." "Obligated," she said. "It was that, or simply collect you, and that seemed impolite given what you've just done." She considered the hollow, the pups, the temperature, the option of running. She was a good runner. She was also running on no sleep, no food, and feet that were still not entirely communicating properly with the rest of her. She evaluated the voice, its rhythm, its containment, the particular quality of restraint in it that reminded her of her father's voice when he was being careful. She did not trust that assessment, but she noted it. "How many of you?" she said. "4, including myself." She shifted Fen, who had fallen into the light sleep of a child who has decided something outside himself is going to handle things for a while. She moved to the hollow's entrance. The man standing in the snow was not what she had assembled from the guide's descriptions. She had built, from their accounts, something angular and severe, all utility and no warmth. What she saw instead was a man of perhaps 32, broad through the shoulder, with ash-dark hair that the wind had pulled loose from whatever it had been tied back in, wearing a heavy fur-lined cloak that had clearly been lived in for many days. His face was not soft. No, nothing about it was soft, but it was the face of a person who had learned to look at difficult things without flinching, which was not the same as a face that had never felt anything. He was standing in the snow at a careful distance, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Behind him were 3 wolves in half shift, larger than men, smaller than their full forms, the in-between state that indicated both threat and restraint, combat-ready but not attacking. A message of capability without aggression. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and something happened in the space between them that she would not have words for until much later. Something that operated below language. A kind of recognition, not of face or name, but of something underneath those things. Something that moved through her chest, like a hand pressing against the inside of her sternum, firm and warm, and entirely unwelcome in its timing. She had read about the mate pull. Every wolf child grew up reading about it. The accounts in the old texts, the descriptions of recognition sudden, unasked for, irreversible. The bond that the old magic wove between two wolves before either of them had a say in the matter. She had read about it with the same academic interest she brought to everything she could not personally verify. She was now, at this moment, personally verifying it. She did not step toward him. She did not reach for it. She stood at the entrance to the hollow with 5 sleeping pups at her back and her bare feet in the snow, and she looked at Riker, Ashvane, Alpha of Ironmere, and she felt the pull move through her like a tide going out, enormous, inevitable, and absolutely a complication she did not have the resources to manage right now. His eyes widened slightly. Just slightly. He felt it too. Neither of them said anything about it. "The children need warmth," she said, "and food. The youngest ones there are 2 who may have frostbite, and the eldest has a head injury that should be assessed." He looked at her for one more moment. Then, "Our camp is a mile south. We have a healer." "I'll need to carry the smallest too," she said. "My feet are compromised." He took a step toward her. She took a step back. He stopped. "I meant to assist," he said, and the restraint in his voice was so precise that she felt something move in her chest again. She recognized the discipline of it, the same discipline she had cultivated in herself over 2 years alone, the practice of not taking up more space than the situation required. "I know," she said. "Give me a moment." He gave her the moment. It took 12 days at the Ironmere camp before her feet were fully healed, which was longer than she would have liked, and also much faster than the camp healer, a brisk, practical older woman named Gina, who had the hands of someone who had been doing this work for 40 years, had initially projected. Sable was a cooperative patient in the sense that she did exactly what Gina told her and absolutely nothing else, which Gina said was the rarest and most valuable quality in a patient she had encountered in recent memory. The pups were in better shape within 2 days. Children, Jenna noted, were resilient in the specific way of things that have not yet accumulated enough experience to know that they shouldn't be. Fenn's head injury was a bruise and nothing worse. The girl called Bree, her full name was Brenna. It emerged on the 2nd day, proved to have a vocabulary she had simply been withholding in the hollow. Small turned out to be named Oswin, and to have opinions about everything. Riker Ashvane came to check on the children each day. He did not come to see her, or rather, he came to see the children, and she was there. And they existed in the same space, with the careful formality of 2 people conducting negotiations they have not yet agreed to open. He brought Fenn a carved wooden figure of a running wolf on the 4th day, which he set down beside the boy's bedroll without ceremony or comment, and Fenn looked at it for a long time before picking it up. She watched this from across the tent, where she was doing the foot exercises Gina had prescribed, and she thought about the distance between the person she had been told Riker Ashvane was and the person she was watching crouch down to be at eye level with a traumatized 3-year-old. "You're staring," said Gina from behind her, without looking up from her work. "I'm observing," Sable said. In my experience, those words are synonyms, Gina said. On the seventh day, when she could walk without assistance, Riker came to the medical tent after the children were asleep and stood at the entrance and said, "I would like to speak with you, if you're willing." She was willing. She was also cautious in the specific way of someone who has learned that wanting a thing and being safe to want it are not always the same condition. She followed him out to the camp's edge, where the pines stood dark against a sky full of hard winter stars, and they stood together in the cold for a moment without speaking. "The traitor," he said. "We've been tracking his operation for 3 months. He was moving pups through the border territories, always through the contested crossroads where jurisdiction is unclear, because it made intervention complicated. We couldn't touch him on legal grounds until he was definitively in our territory." He paused. "You resolved that by burning the wagon." "I resolved it by freeing the children," she said. "The wagon was incidental. The wagon was in Ironmere territory, which made it our matter, which gave us the authority to act on the larger network." He looked at her sideways. "You inadvertently handed us 3 months of intelligence in one night." She considered this. "You're welcome," she said. Something moved across his face that might, under different circumstances, have been a smile. "The pups are from Greywood Settlement. The settlement has been struggling. The pack that nominally oversees it has been insufficient. I've been in negotiations to absorb Greywood into the Ironmere coalition for 4 months. And the traitor," she said. "He was connected to someone who didn't want that absorption to happen." He looked at her. "How did you reach that conclusion?" "Greywood children taken. Greywood under your proposed protection. The timing creates either a warning to you or a provocation designed to look like one. Either way, someone benefits from the instability." She had been thinking about this for a week, running it the way she ran everything methodically, without urgency, because urgency made you miss things. "The packs along your eastern border. One of them." He was quiet for long enough that she began to wonder if she had overstepped. Then, "You've been living in the Thornback territories." "For a season." "Yes." "You worked as a guide." "You've had people asking about me." "I had people asking about the woman who burned a slave trader's wagon and ran 5 pups through a mile of forest on frostbitten feet," he said. "You happen to be that woman." She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, and the pull between them moved through the space like something physical. A current in still air. A pressure that was not unpleasant so much as relentless. She had been managing it for 7 days, keeping it at arm's length with the same discipline she brought to everything, treating it like a healing wound she needed to protect from her own attention. "I was designated Omega," she said, "by the Thornveil Pack, 2 years ago." "I know." "Then you know what that means, in terms of coalition standing. Pack politics, the implications of any formal—" She stopped. She was not sure what she was explaining or to whom. "I know what it means in Thornveil's framework," he said. "Ironmere runs a different accounting." She looked at him for a long time. The stars were very bright above the pines. Her feet, in their new warm boots, a pair that had appeared outside the medical tent on the 3rd morning, her exact size, and which she had decided not to examine the provenance of too closely, did not hurt. 5 children were asleep 50 yards away, warm and fed, and 2 of them were probably going to wake up with nightmares in an hour, but they would wake up, which was the thing. "That's a significant claim," she said. "I tend to make significant claims," he said. "I also tend to back them up. You're welcome to verify that before deciding anything." "I intend to," she said. She did. The 3 weeks that followed were something that she would later understand as a trial, though it did not present itself that way. Riker did not lay conditions before her or describe tests. He simply continued the daily work of running a coalition that spanned 4 territories and 7 settlements, and she was present for it. And she watched. She watched him mediate a water rights dispute between 2 settlements with a patience that never curdled into performance. She watched him sit with an elder from the Greywood delegation, who arrived on the 10th day. 2 men and a woman with the careful, defensive posture of people who have been failed before and are expecting it again, and spend 4 hours working through the terms of the coalition agreement with a thoroughness that left no room for later misinterpretation. She watched him tell one of his own betas, a young man who had made a decision in the field that was expedient but not right, exactly what was wrong about it and why, without cruelty and without softening it into something less than it was. She also watched the children, Fen particularly, who had stopped sleeping through the night but had started following Riker around the camp with the determined, suspicious attention of a small boy who has decided someone is probably going to disappoint him and intends to catch it happening. Riker seemed to understand this without being told. He did not try to charm the boy. He simply kept doing the same things in the same ways, day after day, which was the only answer to that kind of watching that actually worked. Jenna told her, on the 12th day, that the Pups' home settlement was ready to receive them, that representatives from Greywood would come for them the following week. Sable went to tell Fen, because Fen was the eldest and understood most, and she found him already awake in the pre-dawn gray of the tent, sitting up with the wooden wolf figure in his hands. "I heard Genna," he said. He turned the wolf figure over. "Will you come to Greywood?" "I don't know yet," she said. "The Alpha," he said, with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to dress these things up. He looks at you, like he's deciding something, but also like he already decided, and he's just waiting for you to catch up. She sat down beside him. "When did you get so observant?" "When I didn't have anything else to do," he said, with a 3-year-old's precision about his own age, and leaned against her shoulder, and she put her arm around him, and they sat in the gray dawn while the camp woke slowly around them. She had been exiled for 2 years. She had been Omega designated for 4. She had carried the word the way you carry a stone, you've been told, is part of you getting so used to its weight that you forget it is not your natural shape. She had also, in 2 years of living outside pack structure, in the Thornback passes and the border towns and the hollow of a pine root in the snow, learned something that the Omega designation did not account for and the Thornveil assessment had not measured. She had learned what she was made of when none of the scaffolding was there to hold her up or hold her down. She had learned the precise inventory of herself, what she could carry, what she could do, what she would and would not sacrifice, and under what conditions and for what reasons. An Omega, Thornveil's doctrine said, could not lead, could not protect, could not hold rank or ground or the weight of other people's welfare. She had run a mile through a winter forest with 5 children against her body, and burned a slaver's wagon to do it, and she had known from the moment she lit that lantern that she would not regret it. She was beginning to think the doctrine had been wrong about her from the beginning, and she was beginning to think carefully. With all the precision she had cultivated in 2 years of surviving on her own judgment, that the man who moved through this camp, with his quiet authority and his carved wooden wolves, and his unnerving habit of giving her the exact amount of space she needed without her having to ask, might be someone worth the enormous risk of being seen by. The formal claiming came not with pageantry, but with the same directness she had come to recognize as his fundamental mode. He found her at the edge of the camp on the 14th day, just before the Greywood representatives were due to arrive, standing where the pines began and the camp ended, looking at the way the morning light came through the trees in long, pale columns. "I would like to make a formal offer," he said. She kept looking at the light. "I know." "You know." "Gina told me, and Fen told me, and the young beta with the unfortunate timing, what's his name? Darren. He's been nervous around me for 3 days, in a way that suggests you've told your inner circle something they're processing." She glanced at him. "I'm observant." "I've noticed," he said. And there it was not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one, the shape of warmth choosing not to fully show itself, which she had learned was the way warmth moved in him. She turned to face him. The mate pull was a constant thing now, something she had stopped fighting and started simply carrying, the way you carry anything you've decided to keep with intention, not resignation. "I'm not coming to Ironmere as a charity project," she said, "or as an Omega who got lucky with a burning wagon." "I know exactly what you are," he said. "Tell me then." He was quiet for a moment. The trees moved in the wind. Somewhere behind them, the camp was coming to life. Voices, the smell of wood smoke and cooking, Oswin's opinions carrying on the morning air. "You're the wolf who looked at an iron cage and a locked door and a man twice your size and decided that wasn't the end of the calculation," he said. "You ran on frost-bitten feet for a mile, carrying someone else's children, and then you cataloged the political implications of a slave trading operation while you were supposed to be recovering in a medical tent." He looked at her steadily. "I have betas with 10 years of training who don't do that." "I had very little else to do for 2 years," she said. "That's not modesty. That's misdirection," he said. "I've been watching you for 2 weeks. You know exactly what you are. I'm simply confirming it matches what I see." She held his gaze. The pull moved through the space between them, warm and insistent, and she did not lean into it, did not fight it, simply let it be what it was. "Ironmere runs a different accounting," she said, repeating his words from a week ago back to him. "Yes. Explain the accounting." He did. For the next hour, standing at the edge of the pines with the morning moving around them, he explained what Ironmere's coalition structure actually meant. How rank was assessed and reassigned, what the role of a bonded alpha's mate meant in practical rather than ceremonial terms, what he was offering and what it would require and what it would not. He was exact in the way of someone who has learned that vagueness is a kindness that becomes a cruelty, and she listened with the full, precise attention she brought to everything, asking questions when she had them, which was frequently, and he answered each one without impatience or performance. At the end of it, she said, "The Greywood children, I want their welfare formalized in the coalition agreement, not assumed, written." "Done?" he said. "The Omega designates currently in Ironmere territory. I want to know how they're living and what they need. I'll introduce you to Marin. She oversees the welfare assessments. You'll find her either satisfying or she'll find you satisfying. Probably both. And Jana," she said. "I want to learn everything she knows." "Gina," he said, "has been asking when you're going to formally apprentice with her since day 3. She looked at the columns of light coming through the pines. She thought about her mother making tea. She thought about the stone floor of Thornveil's longhouse and the sound of collective exhale. She thought about 2 years of Thornback passes and border towns, and the particular education of a life that removes everything that isn't essential. She thought about an iron cage and 5 children and a lantern, and the precise moment when she had stopped asking permission. "The mate pull," she said. "It's been present since the hollow." "I know," he said. "I won't honor it just because it exists. The bond doesn't get to make this decision for me." "I wouldn't respect it if it did," he said. She looked at him. He looked back with that expression she had catalogued over 2 weeks, the one that was not quite a smile, but held warmth in the same way a winter coat holds it. Not visible on the surface, but present and real, and what you feel most in the cold. "All right," she said. The claiming ceremony in Ironmere was not what Thornveil's ceremony had been. There was no stone floor, no elder council seated in judgment, no room full of pack members stepping back from her without moving their feet. Riker had offered her a ceremony if she wanted one, and she had said she did not want one, and he had said all right, and the matter was settled with the same simplicity that had characterized everything between them. What there was, instead, was the morning that the Greywood representatives arrived 2 women and 3 men from the settlement, cautious and careful in the way of people who have lost things and are trying not to lose more. And Sable was standing at Riker's right hand when they came into the camp, which was a position that had its own language and pack structure, clear and unmistakable to anyone raised in it. Fen, standing between her and Riker, and holding both of their hands with the unselfconscious certainty of a child who has decided where he belongs, looked up at the Greywood delegation and then up at Sable. "This is her," he said. "She's the one who burned the wagon." One of the Greywood women, small, with silver-threaded hair and eyes the same amber as Fen's, who turned out to be his grandmother, looked at Sable for a long moment. Then she looked at the way Sable stood, and the way Riker stood beside her, and the way the camp arranged itself around both of them. She inclined her head with a precise, formal respect that Sable had not received from another wolf in 4 years. "I know what you did," the woman said quietly. "All of the settlement knows. We've been trying to find the words." "You don't need them," Sable said. "Just take them home." Gina's formal apprenticeship began on the first day of the new month and lasted, as it turned out, for years. But the beginning of it was what Sable would remember when she remembered it. Sitting in the older woman's workroom, surrounded by drying herbs and careful labels and the smell of pine and lavender, while Gina talked and Sable listened and took notes in the margins of pages and asked the questions that Gina said no one had bothered to ask before. "You have your mother's hands," Jenna said, one afternoon, looking at them. Sable looked up. "You knew my mother?" "I knew of her. Thornveil had good healers once." Jenna went back to her work. "Before they decided some people weren't worth the knowing." Sable looked at her hands, the same hands that had pulled a lock in the dark, that had wrapped 5 children in a wool cloak and run, that had taken notes in the margins of every piece of knowledge she had ever been offered. She thought about her mother's kitchen and her father's maps and the careful accumulated inventory of herself that she had spent 2 years assembling in the absence of anyone else's assessment. The Omega designation was a word from someone else's accounting. The mate pull that moved through her chest when Riker came into a room was a different kind of truth, older than rank, older than pack doctrine. The original language of the bond that the old magic had written before anyone had invented a stone floor to stand on, or an elder council to pronounce the result. She had not needed it to tell her who she was, but she was no longer in the business of refusing what was real because it arrived in complicated packaging. Marin, who oversaw welfare assessments and had the energy of someone who has been waiting a long time for reinforcements, appeared in the workroom doorway on a Tuesday morning 4 weeks into the apprenticeship and said, Without preamble, there are 11 Omega designates in the Coalition's southern territory who have not had a welfare visit in 2 years. I have been asking for the resources to address this for 8 months. Are you coming or not? Sable put down her notes. How far is the southern territory? 4 hours by horse. Give me 20 minutes, she said. It became the work. Not the only work, but the central one, moving through the Coalition's settlements with Marin's assessment records and Gina's herbalism, and the particular fluency she had developed in the specific suffering of being invisible and what could be done about it. Some of what could be done about it was practical. Medicine, food access, labor arrangements that did not grind people into nothing. Some of it was harder to name and did not fit in Marin's assessment columns, but was nonetheless real. The willingness to sit with someone in their specific difficulty and not perform the discomfort of witnessing it. She was good at it, not because she was especially gifted with comfort. She was not. She was more useful than she was soothing, which was a distinction she had made peace with, but because she knew the territory from the inside, and that knowledge was not transferable through any amount of training or goodwill. She was in the southern territory when the message came from Thornveil. Callum, who was now Alpha of Thornveil, his father having stepped down the previous spring, had sent a formal communication to the Ironmere coalition requesting a border negotiation. Standard diplomatic language, careful and courteous. She read it because all coalition communications came through the coordination office now, and she was part of the coordination office, and the message was straightforward. There was a second message, personal, addressed to her. She read it in the small room they had given her at the Southern Territories way station, with the sound of the settlement outside the window and the smell of Gina's dried lavender in the lining of her traveling bag. Callum wrote with the same careful, controlled hand she remembered from shared childhood, the handwriting of someone who thought before he marked the page. He said he was sorry. He said it precisely and without evasion, without the excuse-shaped words that apologies often shelter in. He said he had been 18 and a fool and a coward in the specific way of people who know what is right and choose the easier path, and that he had spent 4 years watching the consequences of that choice and understanding them more fully each year. He said he had heard what she had done at the crossroads. He said, and this line she read twice, because it was the truest thing in the message that he was not surprised, that he had never been surprised by what she was capable of. Only by his own failure to stand for it when it mattered. He asked for nothing. That was important. He was not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation or anything that would require something from her. He was only saying the thing he should have said 4 years later than it needed to be said, because some things are owed even when the debt is overdue. She sat with the letter for a long time. Outside, the settlement went about its evening. Someone was cooking something with wild garlic. A child was being persuaded, with limited success, to come inside. The stars were beginning in the east, the same hard winter stars that had been above the pines the night she and Riker had first spoken honestly. She wrote back. Not much. A page. Careful and without performance. She said she accepted what he had said. She said she did not believe he was a bad man, only a young one who had made a young man's calculation, and that she understood the logic of it even if she had paid the cost. She said that the border negotiation should go through Riker's office, and she would be glad to assist in whatever capacity was useful, because the border had been wrong for 8 years and fixing it would benefit both settlements. She did not say she had forgiven him. Forgiveness was a private process, hers alone, and it was still in progress, and it would finish when it finished. She folded the letter and sealed it, and went outside to stand in the evening air and feel the coalition settle around her, its territory, its people, its particular quality of being a thing she was part of rather than adjacent to. Riker came to the southern way station the following morning, which was not in the schedule, and when she raised an eyebrow at him across the breakfast table, he said, "I was in the area." "You were 4 hours from camp in a specific direction," she said. "Directional precision is a virtue," he said, and poured himself tea and sat down across from her with the ease of a person who has decided he belongs somewhere and is no longer performing the question. The pull between them was not something she fought anymore. She had stopped fighting it sometime in the 3rd week, around the same time she had stopped treating the fact of the bond as a complication to be solved and started treating it as a condition of her life to be lived in. The way you live in any true thing, not by dissolving into it, but by remaining fully yourself within it, which was, it turned out, exactly what he asked of her. She had asked him once, in the pine edge quiet of an early morning, what he had expected when his scouts reported back about the woman at the crossroads. "I didn't expect anything," he said. "I came myself because the situation required someone who could make a judgment call in the field." And the scout's description suggested the situation had already made several judgment calls without me. "And when you saw me?" He considered this with the care he brought to everything. "I thought here is someone who has already decided who she is. And I thought that was the most valuable thing I'd seen in a long time." She thought about the stone floor in Thornveil's longhouse. She thought about the moment of collective exhale. She thought about what it had cost and what it had made, and whether it had been worth it, not in the way of someone who is still trying to rebalance the ledger, but in the way of someone who has simply decided to be honest about arithmetic. It had cost enormously. It had also made something that a comfortable life inside Thornveil's social structure would not have made. The two things were both true, and she was done asking which one was supposed to cancel the other. Oswin Small, who had opinions about everything and had only gotten more so, was living at Greywood now with his grandmother and had sent her 2 letters already, both of which contained drawings of wolves that she had pinned to the wall of the coordination office. Fen had sent 1 letter, a single page in careful block letters that said, "I told you." She had written back, "You did." Mira was apparently learning to read faster than anyone in the settlement had anticipated, which her teachers described as a challenge, and Sable described as exactly right. The formal mating bond sealed itself on a night in late spring, which was not a ceremony but a reality, the old magic making permanent what had been building since a pine root hollow in the winter dark. And what she felt when it closed was not the surrender she had always been told to expect, not the dissolution of herself into someone else's gravity, but something more like completion. Not of her, who had been whole, who had known herself completely in the accounting she had done over 2 years of solitude and survival, but of the shape of her life, which had been accurate but incomplete, which had lacked this. The specific warmth of being known by someone who had looked at all of it, the burning wagon and the bare feet, and the Omega designation, and the careful notes in the margins of everything, and said, "Yes, that's the one. That's exactly the one." She stood in the spring night outside the camp, in the place where the pines began, and she felt the bond settle through her like something coming home, and she thought about her mother's tea and her father's maps of places he had never visited, and she thought that she was, herself, a map of a place she had traveled to find, not a place outside her, but the precise interior geography of who she was, without the weight of anyone else's assessment pressing her flat. The Omega designation had said, "You are the least of these." The burning wagon had said, "Let's verify that." The children had said, "You are safe now," and believed it. And the man standing beside her in the spring dark, his hand finding hers with the ease of something long practiced, said nothing at all. only turned to look at her with that expression that was not quite a smile, but held warmth the way winter holds spring. Invisibly, underneath, present, and gathering, and entirely certain of its own eventual arrival. She looked back at him, and the stars were very clear, and the pines were dark and steady and enormous, and somewhere in the Southern Territory, Marin had a list of 14 things that needed addressing before the end of the month, and Sable had already drafted responses to 11 of them, and the border negotiation with Thornveil was scheduled for the new moon, and Gina had a new chapter of herbalism waiting that she had been told contained a section on winter remedies that she had specifically requested. And there was work tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days after that. All of it hers, all of it chosen, all of it built, piece by careful piece, from the particular ruins of a life that a crossroads fire had cracked open and a set of amber-eyed children had made worth the saving, in a winter that had taken everything she had and turned out, in the end, to have been the last storm before the long and necessary thaw.